What if I told you that some of the most chilling paranormal investigations in America weren't conducted by ghost hunters or UFO enthusiasts, but by seasoned law enforcement officers? Imagine this: highly trained, no-nonsense rangers, tasked with solving mysteries that defy all logic and explanation. In the vast, rugged deserts of the American Southwest, among the mesas and valleys of Arizona and Utah, a team of Navajo Rangers is facing one of the most extraordinary and terrifying investigations of their careers. And what they encounter will shake the foundation of everything they've known. But these are no ordinary investigators. These are men whose beliefs, steeped in ancient Navajo traditions, collide with modern law enforcement. When the investigation reveals forces beyond their comprehension, they're left questioning everything they thought they knew about the world and about themselves. Welcome to the chilling world of the Navajo Rangers and their encounters with the paranormal. Stanley Milford Jr. and Jon Dover, two experienced Navajo Rangers, had spent their careers tracking down criminals, solving cases, and keeping the peace on the expansive Navajo nation. For most of their professional lives, they believed in concrete facts and the logic of law enforcement. But all that changed when they were called to investigate a series of strange, unexplained occurrences deep in the Monument Valley region. It wasn't the usual run-of-the-mill crime scene they were used to. There were reports of glowing lights in the night sky, flickering, darting across the heavens in patterns no aircraft could follow. Witnesses spoke of shadowy figures, towering and unnatural, moving across the desert floor with impossible speed. Some even claimed to have encountered massive creatures, with eyes glowing a deep red, standing tall in the distant landscape. And then there were the Skinwalkers. Skinwalkers, a deeply unsettling part of Navajo folklore, are said to be witches who can shapeshift into animals or other forms. Legends speak of them as both protectors and harbingers of doom, their powers drawing on ancient, forbidden knowledge. To the Navajo people, Skinwalkers are not mere stories. They are real. And as the Rangers soon discover, these creatures, if they even exist, are terrifying in ways no one could have predicted. For Stanley and Jon, this was a call to duty unlike any other. As Navajo Rangers, they were trained to deal with real-world criminals, drug trafficking, illegal poaching, and human trafficking. But what they faced here wasn't something that could be solved with badges, firearms, or simple law enforcement. The phone call that changed everything came late one evening. A frightened local family had reported strange noises, screams that echoed across the desert, and lights that seemed to hover over the valley, disappearing as quickly as they appeared. They weren't the first to report such things, but this time it was different. The reports were growing more frequent, more disturbing. Stanley Milford Jr. and Jon Dover immediately gathered their team and set off into the wilderness. Their hearts were heavy with anticipation. They had heard stories, rumors, and whispers about the strange events occurring in the area, but they never expected to face what was waiting for them in the vast emptiness of the Monument Valley. The drive to Monument Valley was long, the sun setting behind them as they entered the remote, windswept region. The red sandstone formations of the valley stood like silent sentinels in the fading light. The air felt thick, almost oppressive, as if the land itself held a secret it wasn't ready to share. Stanley's mind raced. He'd been a ranger for over 15 years, yet this case unsettled him in a way he hadn't expected. What if this wasn't just a hoax? What if the stories were true? The weight of his heritage, his Navajo roots, hung heavily on him. He knew that, even in this modern world, some things were best left unexplained. As they set up camp that night, a sense of unease filled the air. The team kept their eyes peeled, scanning the horizon for any signs of the strange occurrences that had been reported, but nothing could have prepared them for what was about to unfold. It started with a low hum, barely audible at first, like the vibration of distant thunder. Then, a flicker in the sky. At first, they thought it was an airplane, but the lights didn't move like any aircraft they had ever seen. They were erratic, darting back and forth, zigzagging in the air with impossible speed. Stanley and Jon exchanged a glance, their instincts kicking in. They weren't the type to believe in UFOs, but there was something undeniably odd about these lights. As they continued to watch, the lights moved closer, growing larger in the night sky. They shifted in ways that defied all reason. Suddenly, stopping mid-air, then shooting off in the opposite direction, almost as if they were toying with the Rangers. "Is this what they've been talking about?" Jon murmured, his voice laced with uncertainty. Stanley's eyes remained fixed on the lights. "I don't know, but we're about to find out." The strange lights vanished as quickly as they had appeared, leaving behind only the eerie silence of the desert night. It wasn't long before the Rangers encountered something even more disturbing. As they ventured deeper into the valley, a shadow darted across their path, too fast, too fluid to be human. At first, they thought it was a wild animal, but something about it felt wrong. Then they saw the eyes, glowing red like embers in the darkness. The creature, if it was even a creature, stayed just beyond the reach of the flashlight's beam, but its presence was undeniable. It was there, watching them, and it wasn't human. Stanley's hand went instinctively to his sidearm, but he knew there was nothing he could do. This wasn't a criminal they could apprehend. This wasn't something that could be reasoned with. They were dealing with something far more ancient, more terrifying. "We need to get out of here," Jon whispered, his voice trembling, but it was too late. The creature took a step forward, and then, in the blink of an eye, it vanished into the desert night, as if it had never been there at all. What followed were days of unexplainable events. Footprints that appeared out of nowhere, eerie howls that echoed through the night, and sightings of strange figures that never seemed to stay in one place for long. The Rangers' training and experience could make sense of many things, but these events defied all logic and understanding. As their investigation continued, it became clear that the Navajo Rangers were not just facing a typical criminal case. They were caught in the middle of something far darker, far more dangerous. The question that now haunted them was, what were they dealing with? Were these simply myths and legends, or was there something truly paranormal at work? And with each passing day, the stakes grew higher. After the unsettling encounter with the shadowy creature in Monument Valley, Stanley and Jon found themselves questioning everything they thought they knew. The eerie glow of those red eyes haunted them both, and the sense of being watched grew stronger with each passing night. Something wasn't right here, and the longer they stayed, the more certain they became that they were being drawn deeper into a mystery that was both ancient and terrifying. As the Rangers continued their investigation, they reached out to locals, Navajo, elders, residents of the nearby villages, and even tourists who had passed through the area. What they learned shook them to their core. Many spoke in hushed tones, eyes darting nervously, as if even the mention of certain names could bring harm. "Skinwalkers," an elder said, his voice barely a whisper as though he feared the very word. "They're not just stories, they are real, and they walk among us." Stanley and Jon had heard the stories before, but they had dismissed them as folklore, tales passed down through generations. But now, standing on the very land where these legends had taken root, they could no longer ignore the possibility that there was some truth to them. The deeper they dug, the more unsettling things became. The glowing lights that moved erratically in the sky. They weren't just random phenomena. They were often seen around the same time people had vanished, people whose bodies were never found, whose stories were lost to time, except for the whispers of the elders. Stanley recalled one particular story that chilled him to his bones. A local woman, a descendant of a long line of Navajo healers, had vanished some 10 years ago. She had been part of a small team studying the ancient sites of the valley. Her disappearance had never been fully explained. Some said she had left, voluntarily, but others spoke of strange occurrences leading up to her vanishing, odd sounds in the night, shadows that moved on their own, and an overpowering sense of dread that had spread throughout the camp where she worked. Stanley couldn't shake the feeling that this case, the one that had haunted the region for so many years, was somehow connected to what was happening now. "I need to speak to her family," Stanley told Jon, determination set in his voice. "There's more to this than we're seeing." That evening, the Rangers set off to meet with the woman's family. It wasn't far from the valley, a small Navajo home on the edge of the desert. The family welcomed them warmly, though there was a weight in the air, an unspoken sadness that seemed to hang over them. Stanley introduced himself, explaining that they were investigating the strange occurrences in the valley. The family's eyes darkened, and the elderly grandmother, who had lived through generations of Navajo history, spoke without hesitation. "You are not the first to ask about this," she said, her voice steady but heavy with sorrow. "And you will not be the last. But I warn you, what you are looking for is something that should be left alone." Her words hung in the air, and for the first time in days, Stanley felt a chill crawl up his spine. The grandmother went on to recount the tale of her granddaughter, the woman who had vanished, and the events that led up to her disappearance. "She had uncovered something," the grandmother said, eyes narrowing. "Something old, something powerful. And that's when the lights began to appear. That's when the shadows started to walk." Stanley leaned forward, every word pulling him deeper into the mystery. "What did she uncover?" he asked. The grandmother hesitated. "The burial grounds," she whispered. "Ancient sites, sacred places not meant for the living." Stanley and Jon exchanged a glance. It was clear that they were dealing with something much larger than they had imagined. Skinwalkers, legends of shadowy creatures, glowing lights in the sky. They were all connected, bound by something ancient, something forbidden. The Rangers left the family's home, their minds heavy with the weight of what they had learned. They headed back to their camp, where the night felt colder than before. The air was thick with tension, and the silence around them felt suffocating, as though the land itself was waiting for them to make a move. That night, the howls came again, louder, closer, almost like a warning. Stanley and Jon stood at the edge of their camp, looking out into the desert. In the distance, a figure appeared, a silhouette against the moonlit sky. For a moment, they thought it was just another illusion, another trick of the mind, but then it moved, fast, unnaturally fast, and then it vanished. Stanley gripped his flashlight, his heart pounding. He knew they couldn't ignore it any longer. They were standing on the edge of something far darker than they could have imagined. The next day, Stanley made the decision to return to the burial grounds mentioned by the grandmother. The area was sacred, off-limits to outsiders, and the elders had always warned people not to disturb the land. But now, with everything they had learned, Stanley felt it was the only way to uncover the truth. Jon, though hesitant, agreed to follow. He knew that whatever was out there in the desert wasn't something they could run from. They had come too far. The drive to the burial site was long, the landscape eerily quiet as they passed through the rugged terrain. As they approached the site, the feeling of unease only grew stronger. The wind howled through the valley, carrying with it a strange, almost mournful sound, like the land itself was trying to speak. They parked their vehicle near a rocky outcrop and walked toward the ancient ruins. The stones, worn smooth by time, seemed to pulse with an energy that neither ranger could explain. There was an oppressive stillness in the air, a silence that felt unnatural. As they ventured deeper into the site, they noticed something unusual, strange. Symbols carved into the rocks, symbols that seemed to shimmer in the light. These weren't like the petroglyphs they had seen before. These were different, darker. Stanley crouched down to inspect the markings. As he ran his fingers over the symbols, A jolt of electricity shot through his body. His heart raced, and his vision blurred for a moment. "Stanley!" Jon shouted, his voice filled with alarm. Stanley looked up to see his partner standing motionless, his eyes wide with terror. Something was moving behind him, and that's when they saw it. A figure, cloaked in shadow, emerging from the stones. It was walking toward them, its eyes glowing. Red Stanley's breath caught in his throat. Whatever they had uncovered, it was alive, and it was watching them.